guys, Light Roast ASMR here, and I know it's been a long time, but bear with me. So I wanted to do another Bible study from Psalm chapter 3. And before we get into the actual psalm, I need to give us some background. So, this was written by David during the time that he fled from Absalom, his son. And this is a psalm about, I would say, living with the consequences of our actions and how to face that. So backdrop, David sins with Bathsheba. He takes another man's wife. He gets her pregnant. He tries to cover it up, but to no avail. And then he has the wife's man, Uriah, killed in order to cover up, and then he takes her, Bathsheba, to be his wife. So, a man after God's own heart doing some pretty horrible things, right? Time goes on. Nathan the prophet comes around and rebukes David. And his rebuke is very necessary to look at for this psalm, because Nathaniel the prophet told David that the sword would never pass from his house because he had done this evil, that his sins were removed, and that he would not die, but his son would die, and the sword would not depart from his house. What does this mean? Well, you go through 2 Samuel 11 through 18, and you find out what Nathaniel meant by that. And David suffered some horrible consequences. So he has three children: Amnon, Absalom, and Tamar. Amnon ends up raping Tamar, his half-sister, and then throwing her away basically because of his shame. Absalom, Tamar's full brother, takes her in and is overcome with rage to the point that he ends up killing Amnon in trickery. Then he flees the kingdom. David weeps over his son Amnon, and Absalom flees. Consequences: the sword will not depart from your house, but it doesn't end there. So David desires to reconcile with Absalom, and so it reaches out. Absalom ends up coming back to the kingdom. Several years goes by, and things only get worse. Absalom ends up turning the whole kingdom against David, to the point where David and his men have to flee into the wilderness very quickly because Absalom has been able to turn the whole kingdom around, and they're coming to kill him basically. So David, let's rewind. David sins with Bathsheba, but that leads to several consequences. His son with Bathsheba dying, his daughter being raped by one of his sons, his other son killing the son that raped his daughter, and now that son is pursuing him to kill him. Yeah, consequences. And we're reminded really the weight of sin in our lives, and that God is angry at sin every day. The story goes on. David's in the wilderness, and we believe it could be during this time David writes Psalm 3, or after he gets through it all, he writes it, reflecting, but it tells us when he fled from Absalom, his son, so we think it's during this time that when he was fleeing that he wrote this. So, it turns out Absalom does not prevail. David turns the tide with his men, and he begs for his son Absalom not to be killed, to be dealt with gently. And so they pursue Absalom and all his men, and Absalom's running from some of David's mighty men. And Absalom gets stuck in the tree by his long locks. He's riding a horse, passes under a tree, and his hair actually gets stuck in it, and he's actually hanging from the tree by his hair. And so David's men come up to him, and they pierce 3 daggers into his heart, and they strike him until he dies while he's hanging in the tree. Word gets to David. David's got his kingdom back. All the people are rejoicing, and all David can think about is, what about my son Absalom? Where is he? Where is he? And word gets to him that he's dead. He falls to his knees, weeps bitterly. Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son. If only I had died instead of you, he said. And so, we need to know the background before we come to Psalm 3, because consequences are something that all of us deal with. Some so horrible, some so burdensome, that we wonder how anybody can make it through some of these things. But we have to remember, every action has some type of result to it. And David's killing a man, taking his wife, carried some big consequences. But let's look and see what David's attitude was during that time, because I dare say it'd be hard for any of us to make it what he went through. So let's look and see what he writes now. When he fled from his son Absalom, he says this: "O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise against me? Many are saying of my soul, saying of me, God will not deliver him. But you are a shield around me, O Lord. You bestow glory on me and lift up my head. To the Lord I cried aloud, and he answered me from his holy hill. I lie down and sleep. I awake again, because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear the 10,000s drawn up against me. On every side arise, O Lord. Deliver me, O my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people." There's 6 realities I want us to see when facing consequences, and these realities are only true for God's people, for the child of God. 6 realities when facing consequences. The first is pretty obvious. Pain. I mean, all you have to do is read through 2 Samuel, and you'll see the pain David went through. But when we get to Psalm 3, the next reality we see is this: when something happens to us that's laid open for everyone to see. The second reality is that people talk about us. People talk against us. Look what he says here. O Lord, many are my foes. Many rise up against me. Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. People talk. Some of the closest people to us, family, friends, can say extremely hurtful things about us when we're experiencing the consequences of our sins. And for David, people were saying, God will not deliver him. God had rejected him. Look at what he's going through. Obviously, there's no hope for him and God. He's messed up and he's gone too far. And you can read it as he's leaving the kingdom, barefooted, weeping. He passes by some of the lay people out in the community, and they curse and they mock him. And even David starts to believe the things that people are saying. So yeah, when we're facing the consequences of the things that we've done, there's pain. And people are going to talk about us. But for the child of God, for God's people, it doesn't end there. Third reality is this. People talk, but God protects. Look at this. Verse 3. But you are a shield about me, O Lord. You are a shield about me. David referred to God as a shield many times in his Psalms. And this time was no different. Whether it was David and Goliath, whether it was Saul chasing him, whether it was tens of thousands of different armies, God had protected David in the past. And David had confidence God was going to protect him now, even though what he was going through was the consequences of his actions. God protects. Look at the fourth reality here. God lifts. You'd be pretty depressed, pretty down, wouldn't you? Look at this. Verse 3. But you are a shield about me, O Lord. You bestow glory on me and lift up my head. There's no way David could have lifted up his head on his own. No way. And there's no way we can pick ourselves up when we're dealing with this type of pain. Dealing with the whispers and the gossip of others. First of all, for the child of God, God protects his children. And God lifts the heads of those who are depressed and whose heads hang low. David left weeping from the kingdom, fleeing from his own son. And it wasn't up to him to pick himself up. God was still there, and God was lifting his head. Fifth reality. In these times in our life, feels like our prayers are bouncing off the walls, right? That God's not listening, that he's punishing us, right? Feels like that. And we're alone in it. Well, everyone said that was the case for David, but David didn't believe that. Look what he said here. To the Lord I cried aloud, and he answers me from his holy hill. David had full confidence that God still heard him. Now, if you look at Psalm 66, you'll see David saying, "If I had regarded iniquity in my heart, the Lord would not have listened to me." Because there is times in our life when God does not listen, and that's when there's unconfessed sin. That's when there's things that we've done that we know is wrong, and we're hiding it in our heart, and we're not giving it over to the Lord. When we have unconfessed and hidden sin in our heart, it does stifle our prayers. But David, if you go back and look, he had confessed the sin when Nathan rebuked him. And the Lord took his sin away. But the Lord still told him he would suffer the consequences for what he did, because we reap what we sow in this life. But the good news is, even when we're suffering the consequences for our own mistakes, God still answers our prayers. And look how God answered David's prayer. Look. He cried out to the Lord, and the Lord answered him. How? Well, look, by protecting him in the night. I lie down and sleep. This is the NIV. Puts it in the present tense. I believe it's supposed to be in the past tense, as other translations say. So let's read it like this. I lied down and slept. Remember, he's running from his son in the middle of the night. His son conspires to try to kill him in the night. David still somehow lays down and goes to sleep. I woke again because the Lord sustains me. So David goes to sleep thinking he's going to die. And he wakes up and he realizes that God has answered his cry by protecting him in the night. And David has got this new found confidence. I mean, look, let me read this. Look at the shift. Look at the shift in his demeanor. I woke again because the Lord sustains me. Therefore, I will not fear the 10 of thousands drawn up against me on every side. Arise, O Lord, deliver me, O my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance or salvation. I think it should be interpreted as salvation. The final reality is that God saves. Both spiritually and physically. God delivers his people even when they're suffering and facing their own consequences. God's still there. And the reason I keep talking about God's children is because the final verse, may your blessing be on your people. If you have no hope in the Lord, if you're wandering this life aimlessly, no purpose, you haven't believed in God's only Son, you're not a child of God, you're still an enemy, then your consequences begin with pain and ending with people talking, and that's it. But these realities are for God's people. Here's the overall theme of this chapter. Obviously, God protects people. He protects his children, things like that. But I think there's something deeper here. I'm going to write it out. And it's this. Consequences does not mean abandonment. See if I can get it there. There it is. Does not mean God has abandoned us, and that's big. So if you're listening right now and you're going through some tough times because of your own choices and mistakes, read Psalm 3 and know David had confidence, and you can too, that just because you're going through consequences does not mean God has abandoned